Hello Greenstylers, Cynthia here, and today I will be sewing up the Cali Active top with you. In this video I'll be making two different Cali tops in order to show you almost all of the options offered in the pattern. Use the hyperlinks in the video description in order to link directly to the step that you want to see. If you'd like to sew along with me from start to finish, I've got you covered. Simply listen to my directions at the end of each step and I'll tell you exactly where to go for the options you've chosen. Keeping in mind that the options for the Cali top are interchangeable, here are the options that you'll see on this pink camo version made with swim knit from Olga's Closet. This option is the wide strap version with FBA. The bra has banded elastic along the bottom. It's also cut with the lower Armscye, which is the less coverage Armscye and will show some skin between the bra and the overlay. In addition, the Armscye is finished with binding. Along the front and back of the overlay, you'll see the pleated option. This overlay is cut waist length, which is the shortest length, and the bottom of the overlay is hemmed. Here's what you'll need to cut. Either piece B2 or B6, the wide strap front. This is the FBA version, piece B6. For this version, I've cut on the upper line for the banded elastic. You can see that you need to cut out those darts. Cut out a second identical front piece not shown here that will be your lining piece. For the back, you'll need piece B3. Again, this being the wide strap version, cut on the upper bottom line for the banded elastic. You'll need to cut two out of this piece as well, with one being your lining piece. Cut one of piece C8, which is the banded elastic band. This is the piece that will encase your underbust elastic if you've chosen the band versus the fold under elastic. To bind the Armscye edge of your overlay, you'll need piece C2 or C3. The difference being if you have chosen the lower, more revealing Armscye, which is what I've done here, or the upper, more coverage Armscye. And finally, you'll need piece C7, the wide strap neck binding. You'll need piece A2. Cut one, which is the overlay back. This is the lower Armscye binding that you see here, and I've cut it at waist length, which is the shorter length. If you're doing the pleats like I am, be sure to mark those pleat lines and the numbers on your overlay. They will help you greatly when it comes time to pleating. The front overlay piece is labeled A1. Again, make sure to cut the proper Armscye and hem length. Again, be sure to mark those pleats if you'll be making the pleated version. And finally, you'll need to cut a length of 1 inch elastic for underbust support. You can use this suggested underbust elastic chart to determine your length, but I always recommend that you stretch it under your bust to make sure that it's both supportive and comfortable. You may want to adjust the length based on your personal preference and on the properties of the elastic that you have on hand. The second Cali top that you'll see in this video is a black, white, and gray schemed Cali top. It's made using Arete fabric from Greenstyle, and the overlay is a solid gray yoga knit from Olga's Closet. This top features a strappy back with fold under elastic for the bra. The Armscye is the upper Armscye version with more coverage. The front and back center of this overlay will be gathered versus pleated like on the other version. The Armscye will be hemmed. The overlay is hip length with a hem band. To make that option seen on this version, you'll need to cut the following pieces. B1 or B5 for the strappy back. B5 is the FBA version, but this is B1 with the regular front. Be sure to get that notch in the center front. You'll also need the back piece labeled B4, the strappy back. You'll need two of each of these pieces, one for the main and one for the lining. Cut one of piece A1, the overlay front. If you're planning to hem the Armscye like I am, you may want to give yourself some additional hem allowance here. I did not and simply ended up with an Armscye that's a little bit deeper. A2 is still the back piece, and again I've cut the longer length for hip length. The Armscye is up higher. If you added hem allowance to the front Armscye, you'll want to do the same on the back. For the strappy back version, you'll need to cut two pieces labeled C4. These are the strappy back straps. There are notches on the end, so make sure that you cut or mark those. There's a cut line right about here in case you want to have straight or V straps. I want my straps to cross in the back, so I've cut the longer length of those. You'll need one of C5, the Strappy Back center back piece. This piece has notches on the ends and also on the center. Notice I've used both marking and cutting out of notches, and you can use whichever method that you prefer. The final piece that you'll need is labeled C6, and it's the strappy back neckline. This is going to go in the front of your bra. I've marked the name and also notches on the back of the piece. And finally, you'll need to cut a length of 1 inch elastic for underbust support. You can use this suggested underbust elastic chart to determine your length, but I always recommend that you stretch it under your bust to make sure that it's both supportive and comfortable. You may want to adjust the length based on your personal preference and on the properties of the elastic that you have on hand. If you're not using the FBA pieces, you can go ahead and skip the section on darts. Use the hyperlinks in the video description or scroll to 1023 for Strappy Back Bra or 1339 for Wide Strap Bra. Use the following instructions for either strappy or wide strap bra. To stitch your darts, you'll begin by folding the edges of the darts with right sides together. You'll need to stitch your dart with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but I feel like it can be a little tricky once you get past the cut part of the dart, so I like to take my acrylic ruler and carefully line up the dart with my 3/8 inch mark on the ruler, and then draw a line to guide me. Now I know exactly where to stitch along the entire dart. Pin this in place and then repeat for the other side. Take your front bodice piece over to the sewing machine to stitch up those darts, and if you've drawn the lines, you know exactly where to stitch. If you haven't, just line up that cut edge with the 3/8 inch mark on your sewing machine, and once you get to the edge of the cut where it becomes a fold, you'll just continue stitching in a straight line until you stitch right off the fabric. Use a straight stitch and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning to lock in your stitches, and grab those thread tails when you're starting to make sure the machine doesn't eat up your fabric. When you get to the end, stitch right off the edge of the fabric and even make a couple of extra stitches, but do not back stitch. Pull your thread and leave the thread tail long so that you can make a few knots to lock in those stitches. The knots will be made off of the fabric, and so they shouldn't be tugging on the fabric at all. So that your dart will lay really nicely, you now want to clip open the rest of that dart all the way to the point. Take your sharpest scissors and just slip them right inside of the closed part of the dart there, and you're going to snip all the way to the point, just being careful not to clip any of the front of the fabric or the stitches. Repeat these steps with all 4 of your darts. You'll have 2 darts on the lining fabric and 2 darts on the main fabric. If your fabric will agree with being ironed, you need to be real careful that you don't melt your fabric, of course. You may want to iron up those starts so they look nice and flat on the inside and then also on the outside. Continue watching if you're making the Strappy Back Bra. If you're making the wide strap bra, use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll forward to 1339 for the section titled Wide Strap Bra. To begin the construction of the Strappy Back Bra, you'll line up the front and the back piece at the side seam. With right sides together, pin along those side seams. Do this for both the main and lining fabrics. Once pinned, you'll stitch all 4 of these seams with a stretch stitch on your sewing machine or on your serger. Use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And here we have those 2 pieces with all 4 seams stitched up. Now you'll turn your main piece with right sides out so that you can slip the lining piece inside of it. The wrong sides, or the sides with the seams showing, will be touching each other. Pin the 2 pieces together along all the raw edges. It's a good idea to alternate the seams on the side so that they nest next to each other rather than laying on top of each other. I always push the seam of the main fabric toward the back piece and the seam of the lining fabric toward the front piece. We'll now baste along all these raw edges. Isn't this fabric just beautiful? We'll head on over to our sewing machine in order to baste them together. We'll set our machine to a straight stitch and the longest stitch length. I like to start in the center back and stitch within the seam allowance, so hopefully I don't have to bother pulling out those basting stitches. If there's any spot where I fall outside of the seam allowance and it shows, I can easily pick them out later on. When you get to a corner, put your needle down and lift your foot. Then you can easily rotate your fabric, put your foot back down, and continue stitching. You'll now use the hyperlinks in the video description or scroll to one of the following steps. If you're making the pleated overlay, go to 1737. If you're making the gathered overlay, go to 2047 for Armscye Binding or 2614 for hemmed armscye. To begin construction of the wide strap version, pin the front and back at the shoulder seams with right sides together. Do this for both the main pieces and the lining pieces. Once you've had them both pinned, you'll stitch across those 4 small seams using a stretch stitch on your sewing machine or a serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once they've all been stitched, they'll look like this, and you can see the thread from my seams up at the top of both bras. Open up both of the bras and lay them with right sides facing each other. Make sure you have the main front and the lining front paired up, and you have the main back and the lining back paired up. Pin the pieces together just along the armscye edges. Once all pinned, use your stretch stitch on your sewing machine or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance on these two curved seams. And here they are all stitched up. Now we need to turn the pieces right side out so that the seam we created is now enclosed in between two layers of fabric and all the right sides are showing for the lining and the main fabric. In the next step, we'll be stitching up the side seams. In order to do that, we'll open up the front pieces of the lining and main so that they're both facing upward like so. And then we'll open up both pieces of the back. You don't have to open up the back piece, I'm just doing it to give you a visual of what I'm doing. I'm going to take the back pieces and flip them over on top of the front pieces so that those side seams are lined up, and we'll pin them together. Make sure that you carefully line up those seams between the main and the lining fabric. Now stitch up these two seams using a stretch stitch on your sewing machine or your serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once the side seams are stitched up, we'll turn the bra right sides out and line up all the raw edges along the neckline and the bottom edge, pin them together, and baste. And here you can see that the Armscye edges are all neatly finished with completely enclosed seams. If you made the FBA version, make sure to line up those darts. And once everything's pinned, take it over to your sewing machine and use a basting stitch to stitch all around that bottom edge and neckline opening. If you're making the pleated overlay, continue here. Or if you're making the gathered overlay, use the hyperlinks in the video description or scroll to 2047 for Armscye Binding or 2614 for hemmed Armscye. To make the pleated version, I prefer to do the pleats before attaching the two overlay pieces together. Make sure all of your pleat markings are on the right side of your fabric and use an air or water soluble marker. Start with the numbers 2 and 3, and we're going to line up those two markings so that they're kissing each other with right sides together. Push the bulk behind toward the center. Again, take the 2 and 3 markings, kiss them together, and we're going to push the bulk in the back toward the center and pin. So now we have two of the pleats already folded. The last pleat is going to be using the 1s and the 0 marking in the center. This time we're going to take the two 1s and we're going to kiss them together with the wrong sides touching. So we're going to push that 0 out towards the front, and the two 1s are going to be kissing each other with the wrong sides touching. So we're going to have a big bump sticking out on the front of our overlay. I like using a straight pin for this step because, as you'll see, I'm now going to be pushing down that 0 marking so that now the two 1s and the 0 are all lined up together with the two 1s kissing in the back and the 0 laying right on top of them in the front. And now I'm going to clip them all together. And that is how we make our pleats. Have one larger in the center and two smaller ones on the side. Then we'll make a basting stitch to hold them in place. Head on over to your sewing machine and set it to a straight stitch with the longest stitch length. The most important thing to keep in mind when basting your pleats is that you want to hold the fabric in place as you remove the pins so that the pleats don't move or fall out of place as it goes under the machine. I like to use my hands as a secondary set of pins, holding down the fabric with my left hand as it goes under the foot to make sure that all the pleats stay in place as they are traveling under the foot. Repeat these same pleat steps with the back overlay piece. If you're making the Armscye binding, continue here. Or if you're hemming the Armscye, use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll forward to 2614 for hemmed Armscye. If you made the pleated overlay, then your pleats will already be in place. If you're making the gathered overlay, then your gathers will not be in place at this point. To make the Armscye binding, we'll first need to connect the front and back overlay at the side seam. Lay your front and back overlay on the table with right sides facing each other and pin along the side seam. Take these over to your sewing machine or serger and stitch these two seams with a stretch stitch or serger using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Here they are stitched, and you can see my two stitch lines. We have our two binding pieces and we're going to attach them here along the Armscye. Open up your overlay so that the Armscye is long, and you can see here that the Armscye is just a little bit longer than the binding piece, so you will need to stretch that binding piece slightly. Lay the binding piece with right sides together against that Armscye and pin all the way across. I like to start at the very top of the Armscye on both sides, so I'll add a couple of pins on the left here, and then I'll go all the way over to the right and add a couple of pins on the right. And I'm pinning with a 1-to-1 ratio at this point. I'll do all of the stretching, which is a small amount of stretching, all along the bottom of the Armscye where it curves underneath your arm. That'll help keep the binding from leaning out when you wear it. Use your sewing machine or serger to attach the binding. I'll be using a zigzag stitch with a 1.0 width and 2.5 length. A lightning bolt would also be a really good option for this. Attach the binding with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then you'll press the binding and the seam allowance up and away from the overlay. Fold the binding down over the seam allowance, and the raw edge of the binding will just cover the seam on the inside of the overlay. So see right there, when I fold it over the seam allowance, then the binding edge comes just to that seam and just barely covers up those stitches. An iron would also be helpful to press that binding up and away from the overlay, but only if your binding fabric will consent to being ironed. Sometimes these swim and other athletic fabrics just refuse to be ironed. Use your cover stitch, twin needle, or a zigzag stitch to top stitch that binding in place. You'll be stitching close to the edge of the binding that is nearest the overlay, and then on the back you'll be stitching near the raw edge of the binding. If your cover stitch likes to unravel stitches from the end, it's a good idea to begin your stitches that are not going to be in the round, like this Armscye, on a scrap of fabric, and then continue the stitching onto your garment. So I've started with that little scrap of fabric, and then I'm just going to continue stitching straight onto my binding, and that will help so that these stitches don't fall out and start unraveling on my binding. You'll now jump ahead to one of these two sections using the hyperlinks in the video description, or scroll to 2802 to gather your overlay, or if you made pleats, you'll jump ahead to 2922, Baste Overlay to Bra. If you made the pleated overlay, then your pleats will already be in place. If you're making the gathered overlay, then your gathers will not be in place at this point. Before hemming the armscye, you must stitch the front and back overlay together at the side seams with right sides facing each other. Stitch along these two seams with a stretch stitch or your serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And now you can begin to fold back your armscye edge toward the wrong side of the fabric and pin in place. I did a pretty narrow hem here. It's somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch, but you can hem your armscye at whatever width appeals to you. Once you've pinned it in place, you can use your cover stitch, twin needle, or even a zigzag to top stitch that hem down. And here's mine. I used my cover stitch to stitch that hem in place. It's very close to the edge and quite narrow. If you're making the gathered overlay, you can continue on to the next step, which is gathered overlay. Or if you made the pleats already, you can use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll forward to 2922, Baste Overlay to Bra. Now we need to gather the top of the overlay. Here's how it looks so far. You'll have the armscye edges finished, either hemmed as seen here or with the binding. So what you'll do is head over to your sewing machine and use a basting stitch and stitch 1/8 of an inch from the top edge of the overlay. And then you'll put it through the machine again and do about 1/8 of an inch away from that one. Once you have your two basting stitches in place, you'll start gathering. Determine the amount that you'd like to gather the top of your overlay. More or tighter gathers will make the top of your overlay smaller, revealing more of the bra underneath. Less or looser gathers will make the top of your overlay wider at the top, so more of the bra will be covered up. We recommend 6 to 8 inches for the front of the overlay and 4 to 6 inches for the back, but it's completely up to your preference. I recommend trying on the bra and holding the overlay up to see what you think. Once you're satisfied with their appearance, you can move on to baste the overlay to the bra. You see the wide strap version here, but this step is the same for the strappy back. We need to find the center point of the overlay, front and back, and also the center point of the bra, front and back. So line up the edges and mark with a pin or marking tool. Place the bra in between the two layers of the overlay so that the wrong side of the overlay is touching the right side of the bra. Match up the front center of the overlay with the front center of the bra, and then evenly pin the rest of the overlay onto the neckline of the bra. Double check that the left and right edges of your overlay are equidistant from the seam on your shoulder or from the edge of the front on the Strappy Back version. Once you're satisfied, baste them in place. And here's what the Strappy Back version will look like. Continue here if you're making the wide strap version. If you're making the Strappy Back version, use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll to 3704 for neck binding Strappy Back. Now we'll be finishing this neckline with binding. Grab your binding piece and line up the two short ends. We'll stitch these with a stretch stitch or serger. Once you have the binding piece stitched up, mark the front center of the binding piece, which will be opposite of that seam, and then if you'd like, you can also mark the quarter points. Now is a good time to look over that neck opening and smooth out any rough edges, especially at the shoulder seams or where you have the pleats or gathers. Match up the shoulder seams in order to find the front and back center points. If you made the pleated version, the front and back center points should coincide with the spot where the 0 and 1 markings line up on the pleats. You can also mark the quarter points, which will be close to the shoulder seam but probably not exactly on the shoulder seam. I actually skipped that step on mine and just marked the front and center back. But if you're new to adding binding or bands, I recommend adding the quarter points as well, as it will help you to attach everything evenly. The seam on the binding is the center back. Match that up with your marking on the center back of the top and pin the binding to the top with raw edges aligned. Then pin the center front of the binding to the center front of the top. Pin evenly all around the top. You'll have to stretch slightly and just evenly stretch it all the way around. Attach your binding to the top using a stretch stitch or your serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I like to use a narrow zigzag stitch for this step because it stitches really quickly, and I know that I'll be finishing the stitch with my cover stitch. You may prefer a lightning bolt stitch or even your serger for this step. If you have a keen eye, you'll notice that this is not the neck opening I'm stitching. This is actually the Armscye. I didn't videotape the neck opening step, but the process is exactly the same. You'll stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the edge and your neck opening stitch will look just like this one. Once you've attached the entire binding piece, you'll press both the binding and the seam allowance up and away from the neck opening. Then you'll fold the raw edge of the binding over the seam allowance until it just covers up that stitch line. Do that all the way around the neck opening and pin it in place. When the entire neck opening is pinned, it will look like this. And on the front, you can see that there's a nice finished edge underneath the binding. On the back, the stitch line should just be covered up by that raw edge of fabric. You'll take it over to your cover stitch, or you can use a twin needle or even a zigzag on your sewing machine to finish that stitch. You'll be stitching right along the bottom edge of the binding nearest the overlay and bra. have a lovely finished neck opening and also finished armscye. And now you're ready to add elastic to the bottom of your bra. Use the hyperlinks in the video description or scroll to $49.50 for fold under elastic or $52.56 for banded elastic. If you haven't already, now's a good time to double check that your overlay is centered on the front of your bra. Once you've done that, we're ready to add that front neck binding. Grab your neck binding piece and find the center mark. You'll match it up with the notch at the center of your bra. Pin your binding in place, matching up raw edges and with right sides together. Stitch the binding to the top using a stretch stitch or serger. I'll be using the lightning bolt stitch on this step. You may have noticed that I used a narrow zigzag stitch when I attached the binding to the armscye. Either is perfectly acceptable. I like the zigzag stitch when I'm in a hurry and I know that I'll be finishing with my cover stitch. This one is probably a little bit more secure, but it just takes longer to stitch. So play around with the stitches and see which one you like best and use whichever one you prefer. You may find that the hem or binding from your armscye is sticking out and creating a little lump right there. Go ahead and trim that off to more evenly bind your neck opening. And when you're ready, press both the binding and the seam allowance up and away from the top. Then you'll fold the binding down in the back so that it just covers up that seam line. Pin all the way across. Top stitch the binding in place using your cover stitch, twin needle, or zigzag stitch, and it will look like this when it's all completed. In preparation for attaching the straps, we'll find the center back of our bra and overlay. Mark with a pin. Take out your strappy back straps and also your strappy back center back binding. These are the straps right here. Make sure you've marked the dots and make sure you've cut on the appropriate line for if you want cross straps or a V or straight straps. On the center back, make sure you've marked those center notches and also the notches on the ends. These are going to pair up with the single notches on the straps. So line up the center back notch with one of the strappy strap notches and then you'll do the same thing with the other side. Stitch these short ends with a stretch stitch or serger. I'm actually using a straight stitch on mine. I find that you can get away with a straight stitch on a short band or binding stitch like this, but I'm not telling you to use it. now we have one very long piece. Make sure you've attached those long straps to the center back so that the dot is closer to the center back piece than it is to the far end. Find the center notch on the center back piece and line it up with that pin you put on the center back of your top. With right sides together, pin it in place. Then you're going to line up the seam where the strap and the center back meet, and that seam is going to match up with the seam on your bra. Pin it in place. Next, you'll find the dot on your strap, and the dot will meet the dot on your bra, which is that pointy bit that goes all the way to the front. Pin it in place. Match up the same points on the other side, the seam of your straps to the seam of your bra, and the dot of your strap to the very front point of the bra. Next, we'll stitch the binding to the top where we pinned, and we'll also add some elastic to the ends of those straps. I like to use the narrow zigzag stitch on this step. It goes by more quickly, and I know that I'll be finishing off with my cover stitch, so the binding will be plenty secure. If you want, you can also use a lightning bolt stitch, and that would work really well also. So you can begin by stitching where the binding is attached to the top and stitch from one end to the other. We'll add elastic onto this piece of the strap at the very end. You get almost to the end, we'll start adding some elastic. I like to use 3/8 inch braided, and I buy it in a spool like this from Wawak. Take the elastic and slip it underneath the foot. You want the elastic to overlap with the edge of the top by 1/4 of an inch or so, aligning the edge of the elastic with the edge of the strap. And then you'll just continue stitching. I like to widen my zigzag stitch at this point so that the part going on the elastic is a little wider. Stitch to the end, and then you'll take your top and stitch elastic to the other side, again making sure that the elastic overlaps onto the top just a little bit. And here's what our binding looks like so far. Elastic is attached to the straps, and the binding is attached to the top with the raw edges aligned and the right sides together. And here's a tip for folding over your binding. When I went to fold over the binding, I found that this section right here that includes the seam of the binding and also the seam where you attach the front and back of the bra was extremely thick. So I got this idea from grading seams. This isn't exactly grading a seam allowance, but I pulled back the part of the seam that includes the binding, and I trimmed just the part of the seam that included fabric from the bra. And I just took away right where the seam is, and it gets really thick, so the binding is all intact, but some of the excess bulk is trimmed away so that when I fold the binding back, it's not quite a thick lump at that spot as it would have been. Just be really careful that when you trim away the excess fabric, you don't accidentally clip into any of the stitches from where you attach the binding. Before finishing our binding, we need to pin it all in place. Start with the straps. Fold the elastic in toward the center of the binding and then fold the other side of the binding over the elastic. Make sure the raw edge stays in the back and doesn't fold over toward the front. Pin all the way down and then continue folding the binding over the seam allowance when you get to the part of the top. The binding and the seam allowance will both be pulled up and away from the top, and then the binding will fold over the seam allowance. Continue to the end of the strap. Add as many clips or pins as you need. I found that my binding was trying to pull away from that seam line, and so I had to add lots and lots of pins. Here you can see where the seam line is visible, so I want to pull it down and have that binding just cover it up and add a few more pins to keep it all in place. And then we'll take all of this over to our finishing machine of choice. I will be using my cover stitch. You can also use your sewing machine with a zigzag or a twin needle. Once your top stitching is complete, you can fold the straps over toward the back and place them on your back bra. I recommend pinning them in place and trying it on first before you do a bar tack to secure them more permanently. And here are the two options for straps that would utilize the shorter cut line on the straps. There's the straight on the left and the V on the right. If you're using the fold under elastic option, just continue on ahead. If you're making the banded elastic, use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll forward to 5256 for banded elastic. I really like the fold under elastic option for the bras. It's quick and easy and looks nice. You need your elastic and your top that you finished so far. Pull the bra out from underneath the overlay. You're going to be working on the inside of the bra or the lining side. Mark the quarter points on the bra, so you'll mark the front and back center. Then line those up in order to find the other quarter points that are going to be near the side seams. They're really close, but probably not exactly on the side seams. Take your elastic, overlap the ends and stitch them closed so that you have a loop, and you'll also mark the quarter points on the elastic. You'll have one quarter point right where you overlap the pieces, and then you'll have 3 more quarter points. Match the overlapped part of the elastic with the back marking of the bra, and then match up the other 3 quarter points. Once you've pinned them in place, take them over to your sewing machine and you can use a wide zigzag stitch to attach the elastic to the bra. You should find that the elastic is just a little bit shorter than the bra, so stretch the elastic slightly as you attach it. Just be sure that you're not stretching the bra itself. Then fold the elastic in toward the lining, so now the elastic is completely enclosed in between layers of fabric. Pin in place so that you can stitch one more time. And now it's time to finish the bottom of the top. Use the hyperlinks in the video description or scroll forward to 5745 overlay hemband or 10147 for overlay bottom hem. To finish your bra with the banded elastic option, you'll start with your band piece. Match up the two short ends with right sides together. We'll use a stretch stitch on the sewing machine, or you can also use your serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance to stitch up that short end and turn your band into a loop. Now we'll take our piece of elastic and turn that into a loop as well. Overlap the ends and stitch to secure. Place the elastic loop onto the band loop and then fold the band closed along the long edge so that the elastic is fully enclosed inside of the band. And make sure that the wrong sides of the band are touching the elastic and the right sides or pretty sides of the band are facing outward. Once the elastic is fully enclosed inside the band, I like to add an additional step of basting those raw edges of the band shut. It'll make attaching it to the bra much easier. Find and mark the quarter points on your band using pins, clips, or a wash-away marker. Then find and mark the quarter points on the bottom of your bra as well. I've already done that on mine. They're marked on the right side and you can't really see them because they're purple on that pink garment. You'll match the seam of your band with the center back of your bra, and then match and pin all the other quarter marks. Be sure you pin the band to the right side of your bra. Once you have it all pinned, you can stitch with a stretch stitch or serger stitch. I always like an optional basting stitch to first attach my bands, so you can do that along with me. And then once you verify that you're happy with the stitching and that it feels comfortable, you can go over it with a stretch stitch or serger and use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You'll need to stretch your band to attach it, but just make sure you're only stretching the band and not the bra. And you also want to make sure that you're not stitching over the elastic. You should only be stitching over the fabric, and the elastic should be pushed away from the seam. If you used a basting stitch, take a look all around and/or try it on to make sure you're happy, and then finish it off with that stretch stitch. And now it's time to finish the bottom of the top. Continue here for the hemband option. If you're hemming your overlay, use the hyperlink in the video description or scroll forward to 101.47 for overlay bottom hem. Lay your 2 hemband pieces with right sides facing and pin the short ends. We'll be stitching both short ends with a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we'll fold the whole thing in half so that the long raw edges are aligned and the wrong sides are facing each other. The seams of the hemband will line up with the seams of the top. Once we've folded and marked the seams with pins, we can then find the center, front, and back of the band. Mark those as well, and now our hemband is quartered. Line up the side seams of the overlay in order to find the center of the front and back. Mark with pins, clips, or marking tool of your choice. I used chalk for these. Bring your band over, align the raw edges, and then match your quarter points. The seams will be matched on the overlay and the band, and the center, front, and back will be matched with each other as well. Note that the band is shorter than the overlay, so you will need to stretch the band when attaching it. You'll attach it using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and you can use an optional basting stitch step like I do to attach it first. As you can see, this fabric was a little bit slippery and the edges did not want to participate in the get in line game that I was proposing, so this is why I basted. Check the seam, and if you basted, you can now finish it with a stretch stitch or serger. And you're all done. Take a moment to appreciate your hard work, craftsmanship, and amazing skills. You are so awesome. Congratulations on completing your Greenstyle Cali Active top. Thanks for joining me. I can't wait to see your creations. Please be sure to share in the Greenstyle Facebook group and across social media using hashtag GSCali. Happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle. To hem the bottom of your shirt, you simply fold it up toward the wrong side, your desired hem amount. We list 1 inch in the pattern, but you can hem it as much or as little as you desire. I did about ½ inch hem on this particular top. Fold it up and top stitch using a cover stitch or a twin needle or zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. And you're all done. Take a moment to appreciate your hard work, craftsmanship, and amazing skills. You are so awesome. Congratulations on completing your Greenstyle Cali Active top. Thanks for joining me. I can't wait to see your creations. Please be sure to share in the Greenstyle Facebook group and across social media using hashtag GSCali. Happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle.